Hello and welcome to the Walk Around podcast powered by JM&A Group. If you're in the automotive business, you have found the place for you. We talk everything from retail, leadership, customer experience, and everything in between. I am one of your hosts, Mark Spoto, joined always by Elliot Shore.
Hello, hello.
And we are happy to have a special International Women's Day edition of the podcast. We are recording on International Women's Day, part of Women's History Month of March. And we have a very special guest. Her name is Deirdre Borrego. She is an executive consultant and coach to many industries across the retail environment. However, she got her start in automotive data and analytics, particularly helped leading some of the efforts of J.D. Power and R.L. Polk, who I'm sure our audience is very familiar with.
Synonymous with data and analytics in the auto industry.
Yes. And Elliot, this was a fantastic conversation because Deirdre talked about a range of things, not only about using data, but also how to be a better leader and how to grow as a person.
Yeah, just so much in this podcast to dissect. But, one thing I just love, I love how Deirdre, as much of a data expert as she is, she brings a humanistic side to everything she does. And that's a great lesson for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, enjoy this special edition. We will take a walk around with Deirdre Borrego right after this.
A recent Cox survey found 40% of dealers didn't know about the FTC's proposed rules changing how dealers sell and finance new vehicles. Don't be one of those people. Listen to Daily Drive for all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry.
Each weekday, we bring you the day's biggest news and conversations with leaders in the industry, like this one with National Automobile Dealers Association CEO Mike Stanton.
We're worried about increased transaction times, increased paperwork. We believe what the FTC has proposed is forcing us in the wrong direction.
I'm Automotive News Executive Editor Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. Listen and subscribe to Daily Drive wherever you get your podcast.
Well, Deirdre, thank you so much for joining us on the Walk Around podcast. We really appreciate your time. And
welcome, Deirdre.
Yeah, we look forward to this conversation.
And that was quite the background.
It sure was. So there's a lot to get to. We want to get to your automotive background. We want to get to your experience in leadership coaching and management. But before we jump and dive in, just tell us a little bit, Deirdre, about your professional journey. How did you get into automotive data and analytics? Is that something you kind of grew up dreaming of being? How did that all happen for you?
Not quite. I really owe my journey, which has been really rewarding to me, to General Motors. When I was in college, there was a General Motors zone office right down the road, and they actually had an initiative to try to attract more women to the industry and into leadership roles. And so I interviewed for one of the internship positions and was lucky enough to get it, and spent a summer being immersed in all things automotive, traveling to dealers, working with warranty claims.
Wow. Well,
yeah. And
that's amazing. It's funny. That's a great story. And I'm not going to ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot with a time, but clearly GM was way ahead of its time in terms of trying to recruit women into automotive. I mean, now it's more, we hear about it and want to acknowledge that today is actually International Women's Day.
Yes.
And what a great way to start International Women's Day podcast with that. But GM was way ahead of its time. Was that totally different for you?
It was very different. And it was such an immersion in the industry. And it ended up being very pivotal for my entire career, because while there, I actually worked with R.L. Polk data. So this is how I got into data and analytics. At the time, it was books. I did several projects going through the books and pulling numbers. And so when I graduated from college, R.L. Polk was actually building their West Coast presence. And I got a job there and dealing with the glamorously named miscellaneous accounts, which was various small businesses. And I worked my way up from there. One of my clients was J.D. Power, and formed a relationship there with the family, and always had an admiration for the brand. And so after many years at Polk was fortunate enough to join J.D. Power, and when they were really wholeheartedly investing in building PIN, the Power Information Network. And as you know, there we were really trying to transform how a lot of decisions were made in the industry. And so that common thread of really, building relationships and learning about the industry, I think, are some of the key themes, of my journey.
So that's a great setup for one of the things we wanted to first dive into. I think, again, talking about ahead of its time, you were on the front end there of helping dealers and folks in the automotive business utilize data. Mm-hmm. And now data-driven decisions is kind of a buzzword, right? Everyone is interested and curious and looking at data in a much more purposeful way.
Definitely. I mean, we hear about it all the time on, the gold mines of data and unlocking the data. And, it's almost become kind of cliche in a sense. And, I think one of the questions we were going to ask you, is, how can dealers better leverage their data? You hear about it all. We hear about it all the time. Dealers want to, better access their data. But how do you think dealers can better leverage data today?
That's a great question, because we have, there's more data available than ever before.
Right. And it can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. I mean,
exactly.
Which mm-hmm. makes being concise and, in terms of what you're looking for, even more important. But it's kind of interesting. There's so many different avenues that dealers can look at data, but I'm curious, your perspective as an expert in this space, what would you be looking at?
Well, I think it's important to have, people on your team, and that could be a broad team, right? Including vendors where you have good relationships, who can help provide that perspective and that you can lean on and, help dealers to really focus on what are the business decisions that we're trying to solve for.
Right.
My experience in some of the organizations that I was involved with, where we had some really exciting data, sometimes people can get attracted to data they haven't seen before, and you can easily kind of go down some rabbit holes. So I think tying it back to what types of decisions are you trying to make? How might you make a different decision with certain data is kind of a foundational element that I think everyone, dealers and other industry stakeholders, should keep top of mind.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, because really working backwards from the problem you're trying to solve helps to keep you focused on the data you need to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And that's really practical advice, because there is so much out there now to get lost in. Mm-hmm. But I do want to go back, to your J.D. Power days and, starting the PIN network, which, now I know, in the OEM world, it is, a lot of OEMs can't do business without the PIN network. I mean, that's a reality.
It's become essential.
It's kind of behind the scenes a bit. A lot of people don't realize that, but as a young woman trying to traverse these boardrooms dominated with men with a new data product, and how is that like? What were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, it's interesting, just back to your earlier point, where now everybody uses that phrase, data and analytics, and people see what has happened in the industry, but it was very hard work.
Right.
It was hard work. I mean, I think for me, it goes back to a point also that I have heard other guests that you have had on this podcast talk about, which is, really belonging to something that feels bigger than yourself, right? So at that time at J.D. Power, we really believed that data could help transform how decisions were made in the industry. And I saw that as a calling, I think.
Wow.
So I always felt that.
Were you met with some resistance or were dealers immediately and OEMs immediately kind of warming up to like, this is a whole new avenue that we haven't explored?
So when I joined, some of the heavy lifting in terms of the foundational elements had been done. So I think, dealers were more receptive to providing the information in exchange for receiving information. And I think some of the OEMs were receptive, but it was data that had not been seen before. And so what I learned from that experience was the importance of transparency. A lot of what was done in those days was more educational. We would come in, we would show data. Clients had a lot of questions about, well, show me how you calculated this. Where did this come from? And I think that collaborative approach really helped us to build something that would be meaningful for the OEMs and for our other clients. And yeah, there was a lot of resistance. We used to use a phrase and say that, we were trying to help people make decisions, using data and analytics and not from their gut. But we would always laugh internally when people would say, well, why is it taking so long? We would say, but we're dealing with people with really good gut instincts.
Right. So, no, that's huge. It's a huge hill to overcome. And, we've known each other a while, Deirdre, and that's a challenge that, quite frankly, you helped us overcome. And it's one that I'm very grateful for, and I saw that in firsthand. And one of the things that struck me, and I'll go back to something you said, but, one of the things that struck me was your transparency. Like, here's the data we have, right? Here's what we see, but what do you see? Like, that was a lot of what, and you got it out of us. Was that a tactic in terms of, hey, being sort of matter of fact, and then bringing, people into your, sort of realm of analytics is sort of a way to get them engaged? Was that intentional, or maybe just something that I observed?
No, I think it started from just a genuine, this is data that we haven't seen before. Let's leverage what our clients know about the business. And over time, though, it did become more intentional, because I think I always viewed it, and the team always viewed it, again, as a relationship and as a partnership, right? And how do we help our clients to do their job better? And that was another thing that was is an important point. You talked about some of the resistance we face. Sometimes there was a feeling like, well, you want to come in and do my team's job. And you think your data knows, is the be all end all and will take the role of my team. And we were very clear, no, we just want to help your team do their job better. And so that was some of the resistance that we met. To your point, Mark, about being a woman, I think, again, I always appreciated formal and informal mentors in the industry, and always felt that ultimately, doing a good job and focusing on results and following through on commitments, would sort of overcome any resistance.
That's a theme we've heard before in terms of finding a good mentor.
Absolutely.
And learning from those that have maybe been there before, but you could also learn and grow along the way.
Yeah. And I heard relationships in there, right? And understanding the importance of relationships, clearly mentorship, relationships. And, quite frankly, something that, maybe is overlooked a little bit, but I think it's a great point that you make. Following through on what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said about doing what you say you're going to do.
And being accountable for that.
Right. Does that bring credibility? Does that help that? Is that what you've experienced, that sort of a credibility factor, or is it even beyond that? Yeah.
No, very much so. I think follow through is so important, and helps to build trust and relationships. At the end of the day, this is a small industry.
Definitely.
And it's always surprising to me, but I see that show up in so many places so often. So I think follow through is a way to build trust and build relationships. And we talked about sort of the early days of my career and being a woman in a male dominated industry. When I got my first actual automotive account, so moving from the miscellaneous accounts to an automotive account, and I was told this is the first time a woman in this company is going to handle an automotive account, so don't mess it up.
Really?
No pressure.
And that was that a Polk?
Time, right? It was a different time.
Was that at Polk or JD Power?
That was at Polk many years ago. Yeah, but that was, I appreciated. It's not that I didn't already have high standards for myself, but that's how it was. But I was still learning so much about the business and about OEM specifics, because as you know, the Polk data is used by market rep, which is such a precise function and so key. And so I quickly learned that follow through was so important. And one of the things I did quite often was tell clients, I don't have an answer yet, but I promise I will get back to you by, such and such. And I would give them constant updates. And when I had sort of my first review, I remember the client had actually provided some feedback. It was Mazda. Mazda was my first automotive client.
Wow.
And said, we really just appreciate, we're not wondering where things stand. She always follows through and she always keeps us posted. And so that sort of reinforced for me that was something that clients appreciated and that I carried throughout my career.
It's such a skill that sometimes gets overlooked 100%. And not discussed enough.
Right.
Like, what better way do you inspire confidence and trust than just following through on what you say you're going to do?
Yeah. And being transparent. I mean, we say that all the time, here at JM&A, but it's okay not to have the answer.
Right.
And it's okay. That vulnerability, there's confidence in vulnerability. And, it really helps to be truthful.
For sure. So Deirdre, when you heard that statement, like this is the first time a woman has been on an automotive account, does that scare the heck out of you, or does it energize you, or maybe a little of both?
Yeah. No, I think primarily it energized me because Elliot knows, I see him smiling over there. I'm super competitive.
Just a little.
Put me in. But, it was scary because I also knew, you are setting the stage, right? You're for others who also aspire to take on greater roles. So I certainly felt responsibility for it, but I would say I also felt, tremendously energized.
So Deirdre, going back a little bit to what you said about how dealers can use data and driven by their business decisions, we talk a lot about improving the customer experience. And that seems to be kind of an ongoing goal for dealers. How do you think data plays a role in providing a better customer experience?
Well, I think that's a great question, by the way. I think data can help to describe sort of what your customers are experiencing, hardcore metrics, right, on wait time or the number of services they were offered and the number of services they've taken, the number of times they've been into the dealership. So I think it can really frame up sort of what your customers are facing. There's so many opportunities now today to hear directly from the customer also. In terms of what's working, what's not. I'm huge, obviously given my background, but I'm huge on giving feedback. Anytime I receive any type of survey and writing reviews and reading reviews. And so I think data can really shed a lot of light on what it's like from a customer perspective and help to bring clarity around how, what your operation is doing and how people are performing is then impacting that customer experience.
That's interesting. And to tie it to where you are in your career today, and want to understand a little bit how you made that leap from, corporate executive to consultant, life coach, executive coach. But, thinking back to that question in terms of data and your customer, how do you link that back to the employee being a better employee, which life coaching and executive coaching with what you do today, is there a link there, do you think, between the customer and the employee?
I'm going to guess, Deirdre, that something you just said relates to that. The ability to give and receive feedback, that's a huge part of being connected with the customer. Am I right on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a huge part of helping employees to develop also. And employees are often such a good source of feedback going the other way, right? I was recently at a dealership as part of a software installation, and it was one where a lot of key members of the team were brought in, and no one knows what's actually going on the front lines better than the people on the front lines. And it was just a great meeting that I'm happy I got to participate in, to hear all the suggestions of the team as to how things needed to change to actually work, how this software might actually work with their processes, where the bottlenecks were, what it was like from a customer perspective. So yeah, that opportunity to give feedback and being open to feedback, I think is key, right? And another piece too is being able to put yourself in the customer's shoes. And that's really so key, no matter, and it even goes back to what we talked about a few moments ago about data, right? Understanding sort of what the outcomes you're looking for and what the business problem to be solved is.
Right.
And being able to understand, what it feels like for the customer.
For sure.
Especially nowadays, when we see that technology, the Amazon experience, the Apple experience, are influencing customers' expectations. And then seeing, well, when we then come into the world of retail, and how can dealers make that a better experience, right? What are some of the things that need to happen, especially trying to bridge that online to when you come into the store?
Yeah. So, as an expert in the industry who's observed it for a very long time, I'm really curious. One of the things we saw during the pandemic was dealers go full throttle into, online buying, modern retail. Now inventory is coming back. I was talking to a Dodge, Jeep, Chrysler, Ram dealer who said, I have more inventory than I had pre-pandemic right now. This is a week ago. And my question to that dealer is, are you trying to get customers back in the showroom? Or are you, but where do you think this goes from here? Where do you think we're going to land in terms of this customer satisfaction that we're talking about, in this thrust into modernization that occurred, but now sort of we're going backwards. The incentives are coming back, the inventory is coming back, and do those old practices that the dealers employed, do they come back as well?
It's interesting, right? If I had the answer to that, the specific answer, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. No, but it's a great question, right? Because the pandemic certainly accelerated that leap into leveraging digital technologies. I think from what I'm seeing, and I think Cox just had a recent study that came out about the automotive car buying journey. I think consumers want to do more and more online. I still think, from everything I've seen, there are certain aspects of the experience they very much appreciate having at the dealership. But I think over time, we're just going to continue to see more and more happen online. And really change, because there's so many dynamics here. At play, but one of which is just the what a precious resource time is for everyone.
Sure. So speaking of
maximize that, go ahead, Mark.
Definitely.
No, so speaking of time and just kind of where you went in your career, let's pivot a little bit to how you made the leap from data and analytics guru to leadership coach and business consultant. Tell us how that happened. And how's it going?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. It's interesting because even when I was in a corporate environment, I was always really passionate about coaching and mentoring. And sort of, I volunteered to be a part of some initiatives to develop in-house mentoring programs and coaching programs And so that was always something that I cared a lot about and was energized by. And then after I was part of selling JD Power, I took some time off to do some travel, which was fantastic.
Well deserved.
Yeah.
Where's the coolest place you went?
Oh, goodness. Well, we went a lot of really neat places. I think the coolest was in Southwest France. My husband's friend and his wife bought a 300-year-old farmhouse.
Wow.
Near the Pyrenees. And it was just amazing. We were completely off the grid.
Wow.
That sounds amazing.
Hopefully you had some wine with you, I'm sure.
Yes, we had wine while the neighbors brought over cheese they had made, and we were picking apples off the tree.
That sounds great.
What more do you need?
But I actually, and Elliot knows some people that we know in common. Someone reached out to me when I came back and said, we would love for you to just come in and help us with some things we're doing organizationally, trying to leverage data more fully. And it was interesting because it goes back to that, relationship piece and staying in contact with people. And I hadn't quite thought about what I was going to do next, and then jumped into that. And I thought, it's not that big of a stretch, because one of the things I loved about the time in the data and analytics space was just, again, what were we trying to do? We were trying to help clients solve complex problems.
Right.
So I thought, this is no different from that.
Yes. Go ahead, Elliot.
No, and I think what to me is so admirable about what you do is you take a human approach. You're absolutely data driven, but you 100% take a human approach to what you're doing, which to me just makes you so much more successful than other consultants.
Thank you.
Is that something that you try to incorporate, that coaching into that data-driven outcome approach that we've talked about?
Very much so. Yeah, I do. I realize I really like that notion of helping people, helping solve problems. Data is a way to do that. Also, as well as through sort of active listening. And to go back to what Mark said, so I got into consulting. My style of consulting is very collaborative.
Yes.
When I was on the business side, and there are some tremendously talented organizations in the formal consulting space, but a lot of times as a business leader, we had companies come in, and I didn't always feel that they listened or extracted the value of what some of the people running the business knew. Sometimes I felt some of that maybe got lost in translation. So I try to make a conscious effort to take a very collaborative approach with consulting. Certainly people that bring me in to do that want a perspective, but I try to do that by really being inclusive with the team and unlocking, what the associates there already know about the business. And then how that translated into coaching was, like a lot of people and like a lot of consultants in the pandemic, I had an opportunity to do a lot of stuff because things sort of really slowed down. And I saw, some of the headlines about how women were being disproportionately, impacted by some of the economic changes and caregiving responsibilities, and just thought I'd really like to give back in a more formal way. And I thought about how coaching and mentoring was always something I was passionate about. So I went back through a formal educational process and decided to become certified as a coach. And so now I've brought those two together, the coaching and the consulting. And what I found is, to be either, you don't need to necessarily come from an industry, but there's certainly this sweet spot around, coaching within automotive because of what, the industry experience that I have, and sort of understanding the dynamics and what people go through, in this business.
Definitely.
Well, we want to tap into that knowledge and that experience you've built up, because, there may be some listeners on the walk around that are current leaders and looking to grow their teams and get the most performance, or there may be some people listening who are aspiring to be leaders.
Yeah.
So, we're wondering in your experience, as you look at, leadership traits and enabling someone to help get the most out of a team or become a leader, what have you identified as some of those key traits that someone should either possess or work on as they grow in their leadership journey?
It's something that I've thought about a lot, and there's a quality that I'm not sure gets talked about as much as it should, and I think that's curiosity. Curiosity to really understand sort of how things work, and to be willing to look at oneself, right? Curiosity about why do I react the way that I do,
Right.
build into self-awareness. But I think, curiosity is such an important point because, first of all, there's always something to learn in this industry, no matter how many years you've been in it. Always. And I don't know anyone that can know 100% of it. So, I think continuing to learn about the industry, about your customers, about the business. And I think even as one moves into leadership roles, staying curious, right?
Sure.
Asking your team what they're seeing. What do we need to change? What do we need to do differently? Where are the opportunities? I think that's more important than ever when you look at the scale and the pace of change in our industry right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what's true 6 months ago may not be true today anymore. Right. And so that constant curiosity, but I really also like how you linked it to, really to growth mindset and emotional
understanding people
and emotional intelligence is a lot of what I heard in terms of self-reflection and being curious about, why did I get upset about that? Or why did I react that way? What pushed my button there?
Absolutely. I think self-awareness is key in some of the coaching that I'm doing right now. That's a topic that is coming up a lot. Why am I reacting that way? What is it about this? I'm going into a certain situation. How do I want to present myself in that situation? What's the opportunity in that? And what might I be prone to react to? And what maybe I should think about that beforehand and sort of understand, the context and the setting. And I think self-awareness is that big piece in helping to take ownership.
Yeah. Well, we've clearly come a long way from that internship at GM.
For sure.
Well, and who would have thought Mary Barra, the single most powerful female automotive leader, I would argue, to come full circle, to start at that GM program and to see their president and CEO as a female, now successful for how many years? A decade has she been,
yes.
at the helm of GM. So what a cool kind of story, for that.
So Deirdre, you mentioned curiosity. I think it's time now to put Elliot's curiosity to the. I have to say, you are a very curious person.
I am
Elliot.
curious.
You're very curious. Thank you. So we're going to tap into that curiosity right now in a segment we call a sure thing. Okay. Elliot here has come up with a few opinions on
Elliot, are you sure Elliot has an opinion?
Yeah, can you believe that?
I know,
seems
shocking.
Unlikely.
It is shocking.
Yes, he does have several opinions. And we're going to ask you, Deirdre, is what he says a sure thing or not a sure thing? And please be brutally honest.
Deirdre, I unfortunately, I know a lot. We've worked together quite a bit. And I'm very fortunate. And so I have some tougher questions for you than I typically would ask. But, we talked about data. We started in the data realm. And one of the biggest questions that, I see facing our industry is who owns the data? And And I think that there's a lot of arguments to be made. One can argue the manufacturer owns the data. One can argue the dealer owns the data. And you have legitimate arguments for each of them. You see manufacturers now trying to leverage the data that comes out of the vehicle to essentially sell to the consumer. And I don't believe that this debate has been settled. But what I believe is that it's actually the customer that owns the data. It's their car, it's their data, and that they should be able to sell the data back to the manufacturer, not the reverse. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
Oh, you bring up a good point. I think, Not a sure thing. Philosophically, yes.
She couldn't do it.
Right? She couldn't do it. I know you wanted to. You wanted to.
I mean, philosophically, I do believe the customer owns the data privacy, and that's a very important topic as well, right? With privacy and data security. I think what I'm encouraged by nowadays, though, is there is more sharing of data between the OEMs and the dealers, because at the end of the day, as we're trying to get more efficient, right, across the board, I think, making decisions with more of the data and having a more complete picture is going to benefit the key players.
Okay, that's fair.
That's fair.
Can't argue with that, right, Elliot?
No,
okay.
Can't say I disagree.
But still, you're 0 for 1. Let's move on. Deirdre, I like to keep score of the short.
He really enjoys that,
All right, moving on.
Okay, let's flip over to some coaching. I've been very lucky to have a lot of great mentors in my career, coaches as well. There's a lot of different ways to assess a leader and how they're doing. There's data-driven approaches of you take personality tests, you could take all sorts of tests. There's 360 type approaches, and there's interviews. There's a lot of different approaches to kind of see what makes a good leader, a great boss, or a great leader, a great supervisor. I believe it comes down to one thing. I believe it's really can be boiled down to caring. And what I mean by that is I think the key predictor of how successful a leader will be is how much they care about their people's success. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
Yeah, I think that's a sure thing.
All right. She got there. You could tell she was not totally sure, but
there's a lot wrapped up in caring, right? I mean,
there is. Curiosity is part of caring too.
It's curiosity, it's listening, it's follow through, right?
Yes, that's right. And for all of you listening at home, I'll give you a little trick that I've learned over the years. Think about the best boss you ever had. Now think about why they were the best boss. I promise you it had nothing to do with how smart they were. All right?
Yes. Okay, so you're 1 for 2.
All right.
That's great.
All right.
Progress.
All right. Now this one hits close to home in terms of you and I, our relationship and how we've come to know each other over the years. But as an expert in incentives, we are at an interesting point in the auto business. And I mentioned it earlier, inventory is coming back. Yeah. And I've heard from the manufacturers directly through Auto News that we will never achieve the levels of incentives that we did before the pandemic, that they have learned their lesson and that period of the auto business is over. But I believe that is not the case, and we will be right back to the same incentive levels, if not more than before, as soon as inventory comes back throughout the industry. Sure thing or not a sure thing?
As much as I hate to give you another win. If you have that kind of relationship. Yeah, I do think
I really like Deirdre.
Me too.
I think it's probably a sure thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well,
we mark that as a win for you, Elliot.
That's 2 for 3. That's you. That's much better
have to keep going though, Mark, because I can't let him win.
Well, we would love to continue this conversation for another hour, but we know we want to be respectful of your time. Definitely. And we can't thank you enough for this conversation, Deirdre. We have learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Yeah, and happy International Women's Day. And thank you, Deirdre. Thank you for being a trailblazer in our industry and for all that you've done for me and for the industry as well. So it's great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. And I love everything you guys are doing.
Thanks, Deirdre.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Whether you are a dealer owner, GM, sales or service, or just starting your automotive career, you are sure to pick up some insights.
Oh, that's very slick. I like what you did there.
Appreciate it.
Well, in all seriousness, thank you for listening. We would really love if you could go on and leave us a review. Go ahead and hit subscribe. We're on YouTube for the video, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. We greatly appreciate you listening. Thank you, guys.